On a cold boxing day in 1935, inventor Edwin Armstrong, standing atop the Empire State Building in front of his peers of the Institute of Radio Engineers, turned a dial on an old-time radio. The familiar noise of static and interference, chopping and hissing as his dial skipped through the wavelengths, echoed out across the packed room. Suddenly, amid the noise, silence, as the radio locked onto a station so clear it appeared silent. Then a voice spoke on air. This is amateur radio station 2Y2AG at Yonkers, New York, reporting on frequency modulation at 2.5 meters. The voice and the subsequent sound of the water being poured into a glass, the sound of paper being crumpled, were all emanating from a studio 17 miles away and had been deliberately organized by Armstrong to demonstrate a brand new technology called frequency modulation, or FM, which he had discovered and patented 4 years previously. With clarity and immediate realism never before demonstrated or experienced in that medium, FM technology was the most obvious and beneficial user-impacting technology improvement since the invention of the entire radio technology. It is this reason we have high-quality recordings in the BBC archives as far back as we do. It made radio more credible for the medium of music, and it actually uses less power and generates less static for higher quality output. And perhaps the story should have ended there. Evidently, the invention was a good thing, a general improvement of a widely shared system. However, at the time of his invention, Armstrong was working for RCA. RCA was one of only a few handfuls of companies that owned the 1,000-plus radio stations already running on the AM wavelength in 1935 in the United States. David Sarnoff, RCA's president and one of Armstrong's friends, had set Armstrong about the task of creating a filter for the static that had plagued AM technology. When Armstrong's discovery was demonstrated, Sarnoff commented, "I thought Armstrong would invent some kind of filter to remove static from our AM radio. I didn't think he'd start a revolution, start up a whole damn new industry to compete with RCA." FM was a superior technology, but instead of embracing this technology, RCA's dominant profit earner was in AM, and Sarnoff saw to it that it would stay that way for as long as possible. In the words of Lawrence Lessing, Armstrong's biographer, "The forces for FM, largely engineering, could not overcome the weight of strategy devised by sales, patent, and legal offices to subdue this threat to corporate position. For FM, if allowed to develop unrestrained, posed a complete reordering of radio power and the eventual overthrow of the carefully restricted AM system on which RCA had grown to power." Over the coming years, RCA embarked on an anti-FM propaganda campaign. First, RCA kept the FM technology firmly under wraps, keeping it in-house and refusing to apply it to any of its business. In 1936, RCA went a step further and hired a former head of the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to lobby the industry regulations into assigning FM to a spectrum that would essentially make it redundant and marginalized, despite its evident benefits to the medium of radio. Under the cloak of distraction afforded by the eruption of World War II, RCA's tactics gained traction. Soon after the war ended, the FCC announced a set of policies that would cripple any spread of FM technology. FM was deliberately assigned a marginalized spectrum. A motion was passed to ensure less electrical power was at the disposal of FM stations, making it impossible to beam long distance, which in turn forced FM stations to buy wired links from AT&T to maintain their geographical reach. Then RCA began incorporating FM technology into the emerging television market in which they had invested heavily. They declared Armstrong's patents invalid, a full 15 years after Armstrong had originally registered them. RCA reneged on any and all royalties which were due to Armstrong, crippling him financially as they had previously crippled FM's technology by technical methods. A 6-year patent lawsuit erupted with Armstrong on one side and RCA on the other. Armstrong was additionally met by lawsuits from other inventors. The legal action destroyed Armstrong financially. Finally, right as Armstrong's patents expired, therefore becoming of no financial support to him, RCA offered to settle for a fraction of what his legal costs were adding up to. Armstrong asked his wife for money. She refused. At the end of his rope, distraught, broken, mentally annihilated, Armstrong lashed out physically against his wife. They separated. Armstrong penned a brief note to her, and on a cold January morning in 1954, he stepped out of his 13th-story window to his death. 10 years later, FM was the medium of choice for music stations. In the world that surrounds us today, our air is saturated with FM, and barring a few gestural honours in Armstrong's name, such as his induction into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, his name has now largely been forgotten, even though it was him that we always hear every time we turn the dial. Do you still listen to radio? I do. It's pretty good, isn't it? Armstrong's not alone in this. Galileo, hailed as the father of modern science, one of the main minds which brought about the scientific revolution, like Joe said, posited that the nature of the Earth's place in the universe was in a trajectory round the sun, a heliocentric viewpoint based on observed evidence. Clerics and philosophers, who by their nature have nothing useful to say on the subject, denounced him. He was the subject of the Inquisition, forced to recant his theory, and spent the remainder of his life under house arrest. Nikola Tesla, another great radio inventor who invented wireless technology, has two of these stories himself. Tesla's invention of alternating current threatened Edison's empire of direct current. Edison even electrocuted an elephant with an alternating current to prove it was dangerous. She was called Topsy, and there's actually a video on the internet called Electrocuting an Elephant that Edison released, where he zaps this beast. Tesla, second story. Tesla began a project in 1901 whose ultimate goal was to test the possibility of the supply of free energy the world over by wireless technology. He decided to build the Wardenclyffe Tower in Shoreham, Long Island for this experiment. When JP Morgan learned of the project's funding, project's aim for wireless technology in abundance, to the point of being free, he asked, how can we get money from electricity which Tesla is supplying to every part of the world? The project's funding was withdrawn, the tower was torn down, and is now a historical site. Tesla died broke and alone in the New Yorker hotel. Or perhaps you're Georg Cantor, a mathematician whose development of understanding of transfinite numbers makes him one of mathematics' big names today. His concept of different types of infinity was originally regarded as so counterintuitive, even shocking, that it encountered furious resistance from the mathematical contemporaries, while some Christian figures saw Cantor's work as a challenge to God. He was described as a scientific charlatan, a renegade, and even a corrupter of youth. Yet, any mathematician today must be familiar with at least some of set theory and transfinite mathematics. Not all of them own toasters as well. A more striking example is that of Ignaz Semmelweis, a clinician in the first half of the 19th century. After observing a statistical correlation between hospital workers who had handled cadavers in the morgue and then immediately afterwards had delivered live babies and the incidence of often puerperal fever or childbed fever in those delivered babies, Semmelweis posited that washing one's hands after touching a dead body might be a wise thing.